This episode of Once Upon a Quantum Leap is brought to you by Lemuria and Atlantis. That's where we're headed,
That's
right?
where we're headed, and they are the
Yes.
best sponsors in the whole wide world.
Next week's will be Egypt, I'm sure. So, part one, we're going to investigate the first and second cycles of Atlantis and Lemuria and inch our way towards the third cycle and talk about karma and dharma, where those came from. We'll talk about the evolution of consciousness, the evolution of the planet, the evolution of our engagement with the planet. So stay tuned.
And for this episode, you will want to keep those lingering questions behind you: who, what, where, why, how, when. You'll have a whole lot more questions after while you're listening to it and after you're listening to us. So yeah, stay with us. Are you ready for the
Yeah,
big?
quantum leap,
This
the
is the
big one.
big one, the big
Yeah.
quantum leap story.
And we've been leading up to this through this whole season too,
Yeah.
knowing we would we would culminate with an episode or two or three or six involving Atlantis and
Mhm.
Egypt and Lemuria and all those good things.
Yeah. Now all of our episodes have been in the type of reports are very interesting, very fascinating. This one is another very, very fascinating one
Hmm.
because it does tell the story of us, the story of human origin, of creation, tells about the story of our longing and the unfolding about these questions that you and I and most curious human beings have had for eons about who we are, what we are, where we came from, when did it all begin, why are we here, and how did this whole thing about us unfold?
Yeah. Yeah.
And not that we have, again, all the answers, but boy, these intuitive reports give us a lot more, I'm going to say clarity and a little bit more formation of things that make a lot of sense, but still leave
Yeah.
us open for asking a lot more questions around those big questions.
Hopefully we'll through this journey of Lemuria and Atlantis and Egypt, we'll get a better idea of purpose. That's really what I want to convey is why these reports are even important. It's not just a curiosity thing and a wow, ooh, cool, and an intellectual pursuit. This is deep stuff. We go way back with
Yeah,
this.
to the
And at the
core.
same time, there is no way back. And we'll talk about that a little bit as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That these reports give us insight into what and how we can move through the world right now
Mm-hmm.
in a more connected way.
Right. Right. All of those questions that we spoke of, and not just those curiosities, but those deep desires, those are embedded, and we can extract more information from these Atlantean reports. So, without further ado, Paul, shall we
Hmm.
get into we'll start
Where do
wherever
we
we can start. I know.
where do we start?
Uh,
We can start at the beginning, we can start at the end, we can start in the
Yeah.
middle and work our way sideways.
Yeah.
Um, I think we have to start with hmm, let's start in the beginning.
Okay.
In the beginning, there was the word. No, it was a big bang.
All right. Because the
Um,
beginning, before you start, the beginning can be right now in the present time period.
yeah,
And then the beginning, it also is going to take us to a time cycle, time period. And all of those are closer than you think. But
yeah,
for the sake of language, the beginning is our timeline. So go for it, Paul.
yeah. Timeline is a tricky thing because the planet has gone through so much evolution over time. And that's well established in the geologic record. We're 4 billion years old or 4.5 billion years in formation. But the beginning of Earth was pretty amorphous and pretty fluid. Like there was the plates of the plate tectonics that you remember from high school, learning about. Those weren't fully formed. Those were drifting, moving around. A lot of the oceans were up in the atmosphere. They weren't, they hadn't landed yet. Um, this thing was a mess. It was very blobby. And along about that time,
Mhm.
in came consciousness. Consciousness started visiting. This is all according to these intuitive reports from a lot of different sources, from the School of Metaphysics reports, from the Edgar Cayce archives, and other sources as well. We had consciousness arriving to investigate, I'd say, investigate this planet and to observe. And that went on for quite a while. And we have a hard time putting dates and numbers and years to that because the spin of the Earth was different, the size of the Earth was different, the orbit of the Earth was different. Some say that the poles were not really formed at that point as well. There's a pretty good evidence for the ejection of the moon from planet Earth, like it was lopsided, and as it was spinning, it kind of threw off this chunk of earthness, and that was our moon that formed then. So there was a lot going on, and we consciousness wise, um, kind of one of us, like a group consciousness, was observing this out of curiosity. And where did we come from? Well, there's lots of theories and um, records from the intuitive reports that say what was it that was observing this? Was it an entity, or was it a group of entities, or was it consciousness itself? That's even tricky to explain
Mm.
because we were we were kind of all joined together as one conscious organism. And the reports say that we came from several different sources, even several different star systems that arrived here and were
And some of those
observing.
star systems were named as,
Like this from Sirius, the Sirius
Mhm.
star system A and B, and the Palladian system
Mhm.
and the Centaurus system, which are pretty close, relatively close to our our little planet way out here.
Mhm.
Um, so we had these beings, these light beings, this consciousness coming to visit here. And we've already talked in other episodes about what are we anyway? You know, we're a spirit that forms this soul bowl kind of container, and then that is projected into matter, into these physical bodies, and it's a package deal. We're these package deals. But in the beginning, we didn't really have bodies. We were just kind of visiting and observing. And little bit by little bit, we started getting more and more curious about experiencing in this world as it kind of cooled and settled, and we could project our consciousness down into the planet and start experiencing gas and rock and lava and whatever was going on the planet, plants growing up, and these little creatures swimming around in the ocean, and then eventually some crawling around on the land. We were there. That was us, and we were there observing, maybe participating a little bit here and there. And that early system was called the Lemurian time period. That would be called the first cycle of, I guess you call it first cycle of Atlantis, but it was really the first cycle of us visiting and experiencing and observing and kind of getting to know this place
And
and
so
this.
us being more at that point, maybe in energy forms,
Right.
not the form would not be necessarily how we would describe what you and I look like today.
Yeah. And in fact, it would be pretty ethereal. It would be sort of misty, ghost-like,
Mm-hmm.
amorphous.
Just a bundle of energy, maybe.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then towards the end of that first cycle, we had more form, but pretty unrecognizable. Think, I don't know, jellyfish, something like that,
Mm-hmm.
where we could move around and we could experience this realm. with a little bit of physicality, but not a lot.
Can I ask you a question real quick?
Well, yeah.
Clarification here. So would you say then that I may be jumping ahead, but I'll ask it anyway, that those forms that were here, all of it was still part of this, I don't know, this type of consciousness that was still forming itself, still, but it was still part of this collective consciousness or this collective group of energy or sentient beings. I'm not sure how to word that, but would you say that those forms were all from that? Am I being too technical? Am I being not clear?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
how
way
would
I
you see that?
understand it from the reports, the way I understand it is that from several locations, you could call it locations, from several trajectories, groups were arriving and investigating and exploring this realm.
Hmm.
But those groups were kind of one consciousness. So they would refer to themselves as we or us, and we are arriving and we are investigating and we are observing. So there's still very much of a group consciousness, group mentality, not really individualized at
Hmm.
this point. That came a little bit later, that concept of separation or that concept of individuality.
And is that individuality, excuse me, is that group collectiveness embedded within everything that's on the earth, within the earth, part of the earth, right? It's
Mhm.
uh,
Oh, here's a good analogy.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we haven't been to Mars. Humans haven't been to Mars, but there's a lot of attention on Mars, right?
Okay.
And we've sent up orbiters and we've sent up landers and little rovers and cameras and helicopters and all these things. So we're sending things there, but it's not quite us, but our attention is there,
Okay.
right? So we're visiting with our attention, we're visiting, we're
Oh, that's
observing, we're trying little experiments, a little bit. We've got some form on the planet, but we're not fully there yet,
okay.
but our attention is definitely there. So
Okay.
that's kind of what we were doing with this planet
Yeah,
from
that's
from
a
other
good
star systems.
visual.
And then
Hmm.
you can also say that humanity is exploring Mars, right? It's not any one individual. Yeah,
Hmm.
there are individuals that are in control of these little robots and helicopters and such, but it's humanity is exploring
Hmm.
Mars. So there's that group thought idea that has its attention on this little planet and is doing these little experiments and then bit by bit, maybe we get some rockets that can go the distance and we've got a team of scientists and astronauts that actually land on the planet. And then that starts happening
Got it.
in the early days. And that's all first cycle where we've got these different solar systems. We've got the Centaurians and the Beldanes and the Xena and these different star systems are sending these groups of consciousness to explore and visit.
Okay.
Very exciting time, I
Yeah.
would think.
Boy,
Yeah.
that sounds, yeah,
Mhm.
that actually puts a, ah, I don't know. I know for a time period, I'm not going to distract us by talking about aliens in that term, people from another realm. I'm
Yeah.
not going to distract us there. However, it puts it for me when I first started to see Atlantis and Lemuria and this cycle that we're talking about in the light that we are talking about it, it shifted my perspective from something that was more closer to home as opposed to a separation of other things that existed that are
Hmm.
separate from me. And it
Yeah.
also didn't make it seem so sci-fi-ish either anymore.
Yeah.
It,
It sounds pretty far-fetched when you really
yeah.
get down to it. And if you
Yeah.
start saying aliens came visiting this planet, then you take out that element of it's us.
Uh-huh.
It was us coming here
Right.
in clusters, in groups, in clumps. And we've been coming here for a long time.
Hmm.
In if you want to talk about time and timeline and years, you could say at least 200,000 years, maybe 300,000 years ago, we were coming here in this observing capacity and watching, well, millions of years ago, watching the evolution of the Earth
Mm-hmm.
and observing, but actually visiting, like landing and participating about 300,000 years ago,
Okay.
piggybacking on the local flora and fauna
Mm-hmm.
and trying out these various vehicles to explore. That was an exciting time too, I would think,
Yeah.
where you say, "What? I can hop into one of these hominids and explore this world. This is crazy. This is
So,
really
so
cool."
say that again. Say that part again. I would.
Well, so we do have natural selection and we do have evolution going on this planet. And we have these us, think of us visiting the planet, watching all this stuff. It sounds like we just got curious enough that we could sort of sift and squeeze our way into these bodies, into these forms that were walking around and doing interesting things on this planet.
Mhm.
That seems like a natural next step.
And
We
that's we
we
talked about that
piggyback.
early. We talked about that earlier around the difference between reincarnation and transmigration,
Right, right. So if
which
we're able to visit across the galaxy from across the galaxy, different star systems, then we can probably uh, mm, ooze our way into a body that is on this planet, walking around,
or a form or a creature or
or a
a
creature, or a salamander,
yeah.
or maybe participate in gas, or maybe participate in what it's like to be in lava, or because it's not going to hurt you. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you're a consciousness being, you're a light being.
Or
You can
water
work your way into the water and into any of these forms.
or the
That's
light.
pretty exciting too.
Yep.
That would
And
be
how
very
sound
interesting.
moves, all of those.
Yep,
Mm-hmm.
yep, yep.
Right. Yeah. And that's one thing that really helped me have a different perspective is just to because I sometimes I do think that myself included at times would look back at information of reincarnation or Atlantis as something that either was too far fetched, too far removed,
Hmm.
or or sometimes I would have a visual image of, well, we started off just exactly the way we are formed right now.
Oh, yeah, right.
And that, so that
It's
already
hard
that
to make that leap. Yeah,
it's hard to
yeah,
make the leap, but at the
yeah,
same time, that's also a limitation um, that we've been universally has been shared historically about this is how it has begun. So
yeah,
already there's a yeah, no, this is how it happened. This is what science knows so far. Or let's just leave it at the creation story. Well, no, we were just God created us, plop, here we begin.
yeah,
So
yeah. So
both
there's
of
got
those
to be some middle
versions,
ground here.
yeah,
Yeah,
both of those versions had some kind of a preconceived way of us imagining. And then
yeah.
when
You've got a
something,
modern view looking back in time. It's
yeah,
not the same as yeah. And
yeah,
if you take into account the idea that we are not physical beings, that we are these essentially light beings, energy beings that can travel at the speed of thought through the galaxy, that gives you all kinds of maneuverability, and you can project yourself into this. Like right now, I'm looking out, I can see my car out in the driveway. I could project my attention out into my car, and I have a lot of memory of what the car is like, and I could sort of get a really good visual, almost a tactile image and a feeling of what it's like to be in my car. But I'm not there. But my attention, I can move my attention into that.
mm-hmm,
So that's what we're talking about with projecting into forms,
mm-hmm,
where you can move your attention, your perspective, and look out through that form. And then if something happens to the car, it wrecks or something, then you can quickly extract your attention back out and say, whoa, that was a close
Mhm.
one. That was an interesting experience. So that's kind of what we were doing with these earth forms. There was a report that I had a while back about this was a family report, and it went on and on and on about all these things that we were doing as a family and observing this. And there was this pairing, and then I went over and observed this going on with my daughter, and then it said this was all taking place in the ocean. And that just makes you pause. This was way back in Lemurian time. And it sounded like we were sea creatures of some sort. And we were in a pod, maybe, of
Mhm.
dolphins
Mhm.
exploring, or primitive kind of dolphin, fish, mammal sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that sounds like projecting attention into these creatures that were doing their thing and exploring. And then you extract that attention back out, and then you project it into a form, and then you extract it out of a form, and in and out and in and out. There was a lot of that going on. That's where we have these beliefs of transmigration of souls that you brought up,
Right.
in some of the oldest systems, in the Hindu systems or the Vedic.
Well, and
Uh,
then then that'll again, I'm trying to stick with this timeline. Maybe I'm being a little too rigid on it, but it's like I keep seeing this as we keep evolving this movement of this fluidity of this energy and this exploration of putting our attention someplace or not goes back to this purpose that we started off with was there was still an intention
mhm.
for those actions, those activities. And one of my reports was in the Lemurian time was just a sound. I was
Yeah,
just exploring sound.
right.
It was not in a form other than my form was sound. And I started to be aware of the different tonalities and sounds and frequencies of other energy forms.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. So that there's this, but yet if it's not like I was in the body that I am today, it's not like I had a tail and I was floating around in a spacesuit. It was nothing like it was just this form that still had intelligence, but that was still exploring and experimenting in this free flowing of consciousness. So there wasn't, I was still not separated yet. I still had this fluidity
yeah.
that was there. And in another report of mine, Atlantis was always connected to form, the development of form, the moving of energy within the form. And this energy, I was connected to a source, and the source was
Mhm.
moving through me, beginning of touch, experimenting with could these forms handle the energy that's moving through me, and could it stabilize? And
Yeah.
that stabilization it was also occurring as the whole earth was trying to stabilize. So we slowly start moving into us as these beings. We're still like worker bees. We're still like
Mhm.
we still are we're exploring, we're experimenting, but we still have like a common collective job,
Yeah, right. Right.
and each one of us is doing that in our own different ways. And like
Yeah.
there was another report from Atlantean, not mine, but someone else's. And this one I thought is just fascinating where they just plop into a landscape and they're so
Mhm.
enamored with, I call it the hippie movement, but they're so enamored with and in awe with the distance of things.
Yeah. The
Just this
perception of
the
distance. Yeah.
perception of distance
Hmm.
and enamored with how far away is quote this thing called the sun, but consciously not thinking about it in terms of separation or distinction. It's just with distance, just being with what is just being
Right.
with it.
Yeah. I'm sure there was just a lot of fascination with
Oh,
just how this thing works, how
yeah.
this planet works, how physicality works, how sound works,
Yeah.
how color works, the colors of sunlight coming through the atmosphere and clouds.
Hmm.
That's just fascinating stuff. Yeah. So
Yeah.
for millions of years, probably, we were just fascinated with observing and that kind of exploration and participation to some degree.
This
I
is
think
one of the
along
reasons. Go.
along the way we started things started solidifying, right?
Mhm.
Just the planet started solidifying. I think we started um, developing a fondness for this kind of form, this human-ish form. It could do a lot of things. It could move around, not like the plants, and um, it
Look,
could,
back up a little bit there. Had
yeah,
this form had already had it was evolving based on the natural land,
right,
right? Am
right.
I right about that?
Yeah, you could say
That's
that
the research is telling us.
yeah,
So
there
say
really
more about
were
say.
Australopithecines and
Okay.
Afarensis and
Mhm.
Australopithecus, I forget, habilis, and then there were the Homo erectus, and yeah, this is marching along. Time is
Mhm.
evolving these creatures, just like all the sea creatures were evolving, the plants were evolving, the insects were evolving. The planet itself was evolving
Mhm.
as well. It was stabilizing, still pretty volcanic, a lot of things happening and earthquakes,
Mhm.
things blowing up occasionally, but it was getting a little bit more stable, and so we could walk around and move around, and yeah,
Yeah. I I in our contemporary time, because we have a lot of interest in hallucinogenics. But some of these reports remind me, I mean, I'm not a pro at any of those things, but it reminds me of some experiences that people have told me because they become so enamored with this experience they have with this hallucinogenics,
yeah,
whether it be
yeah,
mushrooms or, higher doses of marijuana. But where the person experiencing this other altered state or this other level of state, they're so enamored with it, they're intrigued with it, they're captivated by it.
yeah,
There's memories that stay with some of them that kind of still lingers with them, that says, oh my God, this is something, there's some truth behind some of these things that I'm experiencing in these inner levels. And I think that's where that's a good telling of our present time for us humans as a collective. We do want to know more about our origins. And
yeah,
that's a I don't even call it a quick way to get it, but it's an example of how someone is interested in that. So they'll find an avenue that's maybe a little bit easier, but it's still not the complete experience. And it's still not going to give you, I call it, there's no shortcuts
yeah,
to going into this inner world of expression. It really is something that I believe we need to do it consciously, um, to the best of our abilities without too much aid from even medicinal herbs from the earth. But those were used for different purposes at different times.
hmm,
So I don't want to take us away, but just want to bring it back to how our contemporary time period is so intrigued with our history in so many different ways. And to access an Atlantean report will give you just another little landscape that's unique to you. And hopefully will invite you to keep exploring that inner landscape, that
yeah,
ecosystem it's already available and within us. And during the Lemurian time period, we're still experimenting, exploring, we're starting to move into form, and hence the evolution of our consciousness starts to begin to separate.
right, right.
So,
You can think of it as there was a fluidity of this, what we call the inner realms or inner levels, and this outer experience, the outer physicality of the planet. It was pretty fluid for a long time, uh, where the inner and the outer it was just one fluid experience, and you can move and move and move. And then I think you hit on it earlier where you said we started becoming really curious about a lot of things and a lot of experiences and really enraptured with this experience on this planet. And that just keeps you coming back for more. You just want to come
Hmm.
back for more and
Hmm.
come back for more. And that started creating this like an enmeshment,
Hmm.
so to speak, with this experience on this planet. It became quite the place to be, I would think. Word starts spreading through the galaxy,
Yeah.
and and entities and groups are saying, "Oh, yeah, have you heard about this little planet? Yeah, it's awesome. We got to go visit. This is so cool. There's these little creatures." And so word spread like wildfire, and we got to come and visit. And you just want to keep on coming back and coming back. It's like the best Disney World playground ever.
Well, one of those reports says, and I'm just going to quote from it, this one was part of experimentation with teleportation. It's okay, let me
Yeah,
go down. Let's experiment with it. Teleportation. And we see that there was a flash of energy that this one was caught in and flung through a multi-dimensional portal.
yeah,
This one was transported over a distance and survived in the new region. And this was the second cycle of energy. And this time period was that the planet energy was unstable, but still moving. And so there was an impact there of being pushed and pulled and being in the form and trapped in a way that this in this essence had not experienced before. So there was a new experience of, hey, I'm going to go. We're got to
yeah,
practice this.
yeah.
Whoops. Guess what?
I can just picture this like there's a Stargate,
Yeah,
and
I, I,
step right up, step right
that's
up.
right. I got
Where am I
stuck.
going?
Now,
I don't know. We're just gonna shoot you through here, and good luck.
and now you get
Woo.
stuck. And now you get
Yeah,
stuck. And
yeah.
then you
And
get
you get on
stuck a
the other
little bit.
side, and you don't even remember where you came from, or who you
Yeah,
are, or why you're
right,
there. You're just
right.
in this other landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you do? Well, you start looking at the locals and start, you know, hanging out with the locals. And they've also forgotten where they came from. And
But yet they still have some memory of experience of different techniques. Like there was another report where a group of individuals were caught in this vortex of energy.
yeah,
And
yeah,
what was occurring within that is these forms were caught in this like massive vortex of energy. I keep seeing this image of water that's becoming solid, like ice, like an ice cube. But these forms are starting to compress together so tightly, right? That's like, oh
hmm,
my God, now what are we going to do? We're compressing because we're caught in this little vortex of energy. And then you have other beings that have some experience and not experience, but they have some memory of, let's try to help them release from this energy. So even then, there's the beginning of not just helping out, but they have some memory of how to do some things, like maybe we can telecommunicate with each other. Maybe
right.
there's a level of clairvoyance where we can hear your energy and you can stay still and we can help you energetically move out by just communicating
Yeah. And if
telepathically.
we could just reach one of those creatures in
Mhm.
there, maybe they could communicate with the other ones and we
That's
could,
right.
get them out of
Yeah,
this fix. Yeah.
right. So there's this still a bit of memory of how to do things and a little bit of forgetting how to do some things.
Right.
That
You can
slowly is
see
starting to occur.
you can see how thinking is starting to evolve here. So in the
Mhm.
very beginning, it's just simply visiting and
Mhm.
observing distance or observing sound or observing the stars up above or just a lot of observing. And then there starts to be a little bit of memory getting into the mix here where you can remember something before, you can remember patterns, you can remember what to do in a certain situation. We're inching our way towards reasoning, which is a pretty complex function when you really look at it. Reasoning it's got part memory, and then you've got part attention in the present, and then you've got a little bit of imagination into what the outcome could be in the future. But we're not quite there yet. We're
So
we're still working with.
So
observation,
let's talk about the
experimentation.
cycle transitions here. So what you
Yeah,
just
so
described,
these
right? So we get
cycles in the reports, they name these periods as cycles, and you can think of it as a period of learning collectively about particular movements of energy, very generally speaking. And also, they're punctuated with some destructions, like giant earthquakes or an asteroid hitting, or some kind of kaboom happens to punctuate the end of this epoch, this first cycle. There's the end of the first cycle is punctuated with the ejection of the moon, that blob of land mass that was just it was the Earth is spinning and it just threw this gob of stuff out into space, and that became our moon. But it's also symbolic and metaphoric of a separation that's starting to occur. With that moon moving out, there's starting to become a separation of um, the inner experience and the outer experience, or what we'd call eventually subconscious mind and conscious mind. There's just the start of the levels of consciousness being defined. That's
Mhm,
in tandem with that. It's really cool when you look at it in this metaphoric, poetic sort of language, the
mhm,
universal language of mind.
mhm,
So that's the first cycle where Lemuria was the experience. That was in the Pacific Ocean primarily,
mhm.
Pacific and South America. And oopsie, out comes this blob of planet that becomes the moon. That's kind of the end of Lemuria. And at the same time, we've got development in other areas of the planet. Development of these human creatures are now starting to populate and move across the landscape.
And this is where Atlantis cycles begin.
This is the Atlantean, yeah,
And
the Atlantic
can we give like a
landmass.
high level overview of Atlantis? Because in our current historical records, we think of Atlantis as only one
Oh,
time period
it's
that's
so sad.
under the sea, and
Yeah,
it's
it's
pretty limited.
there's a
But the
lot of speculation about, oh, I think it was this island off of Greece, or no, it was this island just outside of the Pillars of Hercules, just a little island. No, it was the whole sub. This thing was huge. It spanned most of the Atlantic Ocean, stretched all the way up to probably Greenland area and all the way down to South America. And just remember that the continents were really moving and fluxing still at this point. I don't think there's if you talk to a geologist about this, they'd say, well, that's a bunch of hooey because this the planet has been pretty stable for a long period of time, and mountains are ancient, and these plate tectonics, they only move at the pace of a centimeter a year, if that. And I'm hoping that we get an update of geologic occurrences, and that we get some airplay about how quickly some things can actually happen on the planet. Everybody's seen volcanoes go kaboom.
right.
Krakatoa blew up in the 1800s and was heard around the world, and tidal waves. And you can have pretty quick, vast geologic changes happen. And we had this vast, very volcanic landmass in the Atlantic Ocean.
And that would be considered first
Huge.
cycle.
That would
First
be,
cycle.
yeah, the end of the first cycle. Then came that destruction, the moon, and then came the second cycle was developing, and that's really where Atlantean civilizations were taking off.
And consciousness starts. I know that's another big loaded question here.
Right.
How consciousness does start. You started to talk about that a little bit about the separation of what we call consciousness now, these levels
Yeah. As we
of,
start into the second cycle, we start becoming more and more fond of experiencing through these animals we call humans, or human-like forms, and we they're they're pretty good. You know, they work pretty well. You can guide them around very
Mhm.
nicely. There starts to become this enmeshment of consciousness and form, where the line between did I project into this form or am I this form starts blurring.
Oh, okay.
We start identifying as these creatures instead
Mm.
of I'm visiting and I'm projecting into these creatures. That line starts getting pretty fuzzy, and there becomes much more of an experience of um, I'm in a body and then I'm not in a body, and then I'm in a body and then I'm not in a body. So that separation, that
Mhm.
idea of separation, really starts permeating our consciousness as we're here.
Mhm. Mhm.
Still not really entrapped in the physical form, but there's definitely starting to become this idea of in and out
And when you
projection,
say
and
entrapped, um,
where you forget where you came from, and you forget that there is an inner level or an inner system and an
okay,
outer system. You think there's just outer
right.
and maybe some concept of heaven or other realm, but you don't really remember. That would be entrapment.
Heaven. You said that word. I heard you say it,
Heaven,
Paul.
heaven,
Did you?
Garden
Did
of
you?
Eden, maybe.
Okay.
We've got all these legends, Nirvana. Um, what are some other words for the inner levels
The inner levels
of
of
existence? Our home
existence.
base, our home turf
Hmm.
is the inner free realm, and then we're projecting into this kind of confined physical
Right.
world for a little
So,
while, and then we're
so we're still
released.
able to play during that time with teleportation, telepathy, astral projection.
Right.
Are our bodies in that second cycle, is it still somewhat androgynous form?
Yeah. There's
Is
towards
that
the end of that second cycle, we start seeing the separation of male and female.
okay?
Um, and that again is a mirror of us feeling the separation of inner and outer life. We've got this outer life in the physical world, we're on this planet, and then there's this inner life. And so that takes physical form as um, male and female polarity
The
starts
polarity
becoming
starts,
much
yeah.
more important.
And I think that would be this is how I've see that polarity, the receptive, aggressive, the differences. Um, not so much as one is better or worse, or I'm not even trying to use the language of the divine feminine. I'm none of that language is
Hmm.
with me right now. It's I like to use those terminologies in terms of creating and creation. That both
Yeah,
of those polarities, you need the opposites for
yeah.
something new to begin to start forming itself.
Well, you've talked about art many times
Mhm.
about you need some space, and then you put a point there, and then another point, and you could
Mhm.
connect those dots, and then you've got a
Mhm.
line, you've got distance,
Mhm.
but there's this idea of separation between the 2 points,
Mhm.
and neither is better than the other, but it does create a tension because of the separation. And then you can have dimensionality to that, and that adds another kind of a tension or polarity into the space. And
And
you're off
those
and running, and you can start creating things with
That's right.
the
Those
space and the line and the form. And
and both of those polarities are part of the expression, are part of the formation, however you want to say that.
mhm.
So
And we're getting
that's
at this point, we're getting more sophisticated with creating.
Mhm.
We're not just observing. We've done that, been there, got the t-shirt, and we want to actually build things. And we find that we can with these bodies, with these hands, we can actually make stuff. You know,
And
you
this
can,
is where we're merging from the collective to some of the individual.
yeah, yeah. Now we're starting to, and you actually see some entrapment going on in the
Mm-hmm.
second cycle,
Mm-hmm.
definitely with the polarity. I'm pretty sure this is where the legends of the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve start emerging, where there's the separation, there's this polarity of
Mm-hmm.
male and female,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's also the start of judging things
Mm-hmm.
of as right and wrong or good and bad or up and down, or there's polarity. We're really, really working that in order to create, yes, but also it's just part of the deal is that we're now exploring judgment and polarity.
Yeah, so my example of the that I gave of my Lemurian experience of sound, it did indicate there that while I was experiencing sound, the concept of meaning was not integrated at that point. It's like I wasn't trying to make meaning out of
Yeah,
what
yeah,
does that sound mean? What is this?
yeah,
And in the present time period, we have meaning.
yeah,
What does that mean?
yeah,
Does that sound have something behind it? Is there's again back to what reasoning brings
yeah,
about. It's all of those other elements that are part of how we've evolved, and the individual is starting to ask other questions. What is this
yeah.
about? What and would you
Yeah,
say
I,
that
I would
that's
say we
go ahead.
probably didn't even have a concept of learning or understanding at that point. We're just
Mhm.
experiencing, creating. There's probably memory, definitely attention. You're able to focus your attention on a thing that you're creating here. And that's really cool. And you're excited and joyful about that. But whether it has significance and meaning, I'd say that's probably when it started being born, is in that second cycle.
And can we go back a little bit because we did forget to talk about
Uh,
this imprinting that started to occur. I know you and I have talked a little bit about how that maybe could have seeded dharma into play, how with those first experiences of us exploring and experimenting, it started to have an imprint
yes.
that
Yes.
stayed with us as we moved forward, of whether it be fluidity, distance, whatever the qualities or characteristics you want to put
Yeah.
behind those. That began the trajectory, and then slowly we moved into what going into the third cycle of Atlantis, where the polarity and the judgment started to take place, and maybe now karma is coming into place.
Right. The as we moved into this idea of I'm a separate being, I'm not the group, I'm part of the group, I'm an extension of the group. I think I'm separate. I believe I'm separate. Not really, but we start thinking and believing that we're separate beings. Um, we start forming this principle of soul, of I think of soul like a bowl, maybe because it rhymes, but the soul is this bowl that holds your past experiences and your understandings and the misunderstandings and um, everything that is about you, and you start getting this sense of individuality because of this soul principle that came because of the principle of separation, this idea of separation or the perception of separation. And with that formation of soul, you have this what you call the wheel of karma, or this cycle of karma and dharma, where you've got understandings that you want to build or feel like you need more experience with this, and you've got enough of experience with that that you could draw on that dharma quality. And we've talked about dharma in other episodes and karma in other episodes. So you've got these wheels of dharma and karma that are fueling and coming from your perception of separation from your true nature, this
Mhm.
the source emanation of you.
Mhm.
We start taking on
Yeah, there was
individual identities and that imprinting idea of I am here for this, and maybe certain traumatic experiences happen, and that imprints a particular stamp on this soul that it is now going to investigate
an
and
example of
echo.
that. An example of that, Paul, would be my one of my God reports long time ago. It was about again working with form, and me having the ability to stabilize and kind of have a level of security of stabilizing a form. and I was distracted. So my attention moved quickly. And because of a movement that I had made, and the term that was used was there was a deleterious movement on this
Hmm.
one's part. And it even said that that was something that started this movement or this further karmic about just, I felt so bad,
Hmm.
like it's like I had to forgive myself for not doing my part. Did I mess something up? Did I go back and try to fix what I could, made a
Oh
mistake
yeah,
on?
yeah.
So there's these other echoes that keep going with me. And at the time I received that report, it resonated with me so well because I thought, oh my God, I do. I mean, sometimes it's like, God, did I make the mistake? I used to feel so bad about, did I move my attention off enough where if I had not, maybe that little
Hmm.
mistake couldn't have happened.
Ooh, regret and guilt and
Regrets and
yeah.
guilt,
Wow.
those, right? Those are little
Yeah.
karmas, I think, that you're talking about that we
Yeah,
have to
those
also.
imprints, yep. And then
Mhm,
you end up playing out that same kind of idea in lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. You set up a resonance of uh, I need to play out this maybe guilt and regret, and that will echo through 100 lifetimes until you really start understanding how to release that pattern, how
to
to,
release the pattern, right?
that it's not really that bad, it's neutral, and
Mhm,
yeah, just really understanding the pattern.
right. Because we have
And 100
spoken about,
lifetimes really isn't that long for a
well,
soul.
I mean, that it's a blink of an eye, really. But we have
Yeah.
spoken about the patterns, about the productive, patterns that help us, because there are other reports that we also learned. There's a one about a man. This one's just beautiful. A report of this Atlantean time period, um, where he was part of a lineage, a long,
Oh, the
long
drummer.
lineage.
Yeah.
The drummer.
Yeah.
He was
Yeah.
a drummer and he was a leader of this group. And um, where I would think is maybe solstice, the longest day, where they just, this sound would permeate for different tribes to come from throughout to receive the healing. And this drumming, this sound just penetrated.
Hmm.
And he had the ability to move up and out of his body and observe, heal, while the collective lineage of his own tribe would also be in support of this healing. He was also very well linked to the earth. How did he resonated with the core of the earth as if they were one? And so it was, again, just a very a deep, I would use these words sacred, even though that wasn't used there at the time. It was just what you did
Yeah.
because it was part of the collective function to keep, it was just part of the collective workings of what we do.
Yeah. Very connected with Earth, very
To,
connected with
right.
the movement of the heavens and yeah,
And the
and
lineage,
each other. And
everyone
yeah.
knew what they needed to do. And then in the present time period, the so what, what is that
Hmm.
lovely story about for me in the present? It just talks about how that particular individual still had a deep, deep memory of those echoes of that
Hmm.
time period
Yeah.
and longed to return, not to necessarily do the same thing, but to carry through those same patterns
Yeah.
that were needed at the time period and are going to be needed in this time period for our humanity in just in a different way.
I think you've got a lot of people feeling this, their Atlantean lifetimes surfacing. You could call it Atlantis is rising again, but
Mhm.
in that way, it's we're getting closer and closer to recognizing that there is such a deepness to us. And when you start feeling that and really sensing it, there can be a depression that sets in because of that, because you feel like I am stuck, I'm trapped in this little world out here
Mhm.
in this physical world. And I know that I'm so much more. I know that I'm this eternal light being, but how do I get there? How do I get back to that? There's this longing for home. There's a longing for that connectedness. There's a longing for communion with others, and you just don't know how to get there. And
Because I
it's,
do think that that intuitive part of us resonates with something so deep that it's in our body,
It's imprinted in our
it's
DNA
imprinted in our
probably, and
DNA. We
yeah.
receive it in a touch from someone else, or it resonates because someone has captured a glimpse of that in a song, or
Hmm.
they've written about it in a
Right.
poem, or it's artistically expressed,
Yeah.
or even in some of our entertainment. Someone will say something and it's like, God, there's an element of truth to what you're saying.
Yeah. And it goes right in. It goes
It
deep
goes, yeah,
inside of you and it touches
right.
this deep part of you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we're waking up more and more and more, faster and faster to the depth of our existence, and the connectedness, and that we're we're all in this together as humanity. And yet we still have all of these trappings and vestiges of separation that we're dealing with.
We're dealing with.
Yeah,
And this is where the individual part, I would say, Paul, is it's still our own, it's our individual responsibility to work through those things,
yeah,
to understand those patterns, break through patterns, bring in patterns that will help us, that have helped us before.
yeah.
But it's the individual responsibility. But when I say that, and when I say that, not but, and when I say that, it is, you're still part of a collective group,
Yeah.
but you need to do your part so that that collective group then becomes even stronger or more of whatever it needs to become.
There's another poetic visual that happens in the third cycle of Atlantis. Yes, there's another destruction at the end of the second cycle. Um, there's another earth shifting, tidal waves, volcanoes, earthquakes,
Mhm.
probably more asteroids or meteors. And there's a breaking up of this giant continent of Atlantis into smaller sections. And I think at first there were 22 sections, who knows? And then a few of them sank, and then it was down to 13 larger islands. So that the Earth was still pretty unstable. And the poetic part is that, um, you can look at the giant oneness of Atlantis in the beginning, and then it starts fractionating into individual pieces, into smaller pieces and smaller pieces. Eventually, when we get to the last destruction, the fourth cycle destruction, it's
When you say
completely
pieces, you're talking about land masses?
yeah, land
Yep,
masses,
land masses.
islands,
Right.
giant.
Okay.
So the symbology of it submerging completely, is poetically like our consciousness submerging into physicality. Like we have become completely immersed in this physical world, and this is all there is, and we've lost touch with our inner origin for a
Mm-hmm.
little while. And then the journey continues, and bit by bit we start coming back up out of that. And so the patterns that you talked about, or these memories that we have of connectedness, are memories that echo in our soul of wholeness. That's what's drawing us up and out of this submersion that we've
Mm-hmm.
been existing in. I love the imagery of the big continent breaking up, individualizing and sinking, and then rising again within each individual
Mm-hmm.
on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Bit by bit,
Bit
we're
by
coming
bit.
up
Right. Right.
out of this fog that we've been in for a
And I
long time.
and I've said this before. I'll keep saying it again, and maybe I'll just have to keep saying it in different ways so that it makes sense to me even deeper. But that's why I value any human being that is whatever discipline they're in, whatever passion they've decided to invest their time and energy in during this time period. It's those individuals that are just deeply rooted in their the gift that they're really, trying to understand and deepen, as well as they have that thought that what they're doing, it does matter. It's going to make a difference to my small community, maybe the larger community as a whole, but they're doing it for a purpose more than just themselves,
Mhm.
self motivated. It's
Yeah.
those I think that have, I would use the word, maybe there's a level of awakening that has permeated and it's ready to just share. And it's that type of individual that I think would really be ready for an Atlantean report
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's
Where
gonna, it's
you're
where
rising
you're,
up out of the
mhm.
me, individual survival kind of consciousness. And you've already achieved a level of, yeah, there is so much more. And we are much more that connected uh, uh, than we ever thought. And
Yeah,
service to another is really service to myself. Yeah.
that analogy of the landmass, that rising, I think our, the individuals that we're talking about they're doing that. Their bodies are doing that. Their consciousness
Hmm.
is doing that. It's rising.
Yeah.
So it's occurring not just in the land, but it's occurring within human beings right now.
Yeah. You have alliances that
Hmm.
are much more than political alliances. You've got an alliance of spirit, you've got an alliance of consciousness, you've got
Of
uh,
wonder, of not just curiosity, of a desire to explore those new worlds that is Star Trek.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, just
yeah,
but to really have that desire that it's not just externally outside of us, not to explore the worlds outside of us only,
yeah,
but to explore the landscape within. And I
yeah,
think that's where these Atlantean reports, wherever you are in your journey, if you decide to get one or not, one of these Atlantean reports, I would recommend, if you know that that person describes you that we've just discussed, this invest in one of these because it'll take you to that next quantum leap that you're looking for. It
yeah.
really will.
We may have to go to another episode because we've barely entered into the third cycle here,
That's right.
let alone the fourth cycle of Atlantis and the great
Mhm.
destruction in Egypt and all of that wonderful stuff.
Yep. So that'll be in our Atlantean conversation continues. So stay with us on that one. I was just trying to think if I could find a wonderful quote because there's so many from these Atlantean reports, but it's
I think we're
uh
just going to have to post a bunch of these reports and let people dive into them. I think they're going to be curious enough to take on 5 or 6 of these and listen to them. We'll have to post them on the website and
yep.
steer people over there.
And even just the wonderful questions that some of these, folks have asked. We've not talked about ego, how
Oh yeah,
we'll talk about that. We'll talk about maybe the universal laws. We'll obviously finish up Atlantis. Fourth cycle, we'll go into the fifth cycle known as Egypt. And then we'll talk about intuitive spiritual man is the next cycle that we're moving into. And Paul, I'm
yeah,
intrigued especially about where did that whole intuitive spiritual man term come from?
yeah, yeah.
So we'll talk about that.
Oh,
Um,
this is so exciting.
isn't it?
I
I
love it.
know.
I
All
love it.
right.
So, and we'll probably in the next episode we'll touch base again back with the first cycle and second cycle, get a running start, and then into third cycle and keep on going into fourth and fifth cycle, where we're headed and why we're even doing
All
this.
right. See you later.
Once Upon a Quantum Leap is for your reference only. This podcast and the material is intended solely as educational information and should not be used for diagnosis or treatment of any health problem, financial, or legal advice.
You can listen to full episodes and find out about Paul and Capucine at onceuponaquantumleap.com. All reports shared on this show have been released with permission, and identifiers have been removed for individuals' privacy.
The intuitive reports referred to in each episode are available on our website, on the podcast page, and through links in our show notes. We encourage you to listen to those for greater context.
If you're interested in obtaining your own intuitive report, go to quantuminsight.co. That's quantuminsight.co. You can listen to us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.